Well, the Switch 2 news continues to roll along as we now have a look at how Nintendo is approaching the cartridge situation so that the Switch 1 cartridges work on the Switch 2, but the Switch 2 cartridges don't work on the Switch 1. Kind of a similar approach as to what they did with the 3DS and the DS, but we'll take a look at that through some images that got out there from these different hands-on events. And then there's also something else that came up that has caused a bit of a discussion online, interesting talking point, as Shuhei Yoshida has reflected on the Switch 2 reveal and even gone as far as to say that Nintendo is losing their identity with what they've shown here so far with the Switch 2 and their new generation, but we'll go over all that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, especially if you're trying to keep up to date on all the Switch 2 stuff. I'm doing my best to also keep up to date in some of these videos. First, though, let's take a look at the cartridge situation. This was posted up in multiple different spots. So I noticed that Nintendo had an image that they posted up and was floating around. I think that came out of like a Discord and on Reddit, and then another image that was posted up that you're seeing here, and this one is from Dude Skyer over on Twitter X. But the idea here is with that Switch Welcome Tour, they decided, that being Nintendo, to go over all kinds of different features for the Switch 2, and even got really into the fine details here as to how, say, the cartridges are different. Obviously, they're different because of the color, one being red and the other one just being like that darkish black gray kind of look. But also, you can see it is different when it comes to the configuration, specifically the kind of the molding that they have for the plastics, so that it doesn't key up one way versus the other. Now, the other image, as I mentioned, is a bit closer here, which we can see this little kind of notch here, as people are saying now, versus what's a more just straight, you can see straight cut out here for the Switch 1 cartridge. And that is all it really takes, believe it or not, to make it so that this does not work, say, in a Switch 1. And it's pretty straightforward, as it's kind of hard to see here, but the Switch 2 ridge that they have cut out here is actually higher than the Switch 1 cutout. So the idea, of course, being this would run into sort of the key that they have. So if we look at, it's again hard to see here, kind of picture, flip the cartridge around so the label side's out, that's what you'd be seeing here. And on this side, you would have essentially kind of a metal teeth that would stop it from sitting in there when you push down. But because the Switch 2 cartridge right here is higher technically, that means that it would fit into the Switch 2 no problem, and this would actually not be an issue when also pushing in there, but it wouldn't work in reverse. So, I mean, it makes sense. It's pretty much what I figured they would do, although I kind of wondered if the top of the cartridge would look a little different, similar to the DS versus the 3DS, which was much more obvious why that cartridge wouldn't work in, say, a DS Lite versus the 3DS. This, I think, is a much better approach, though, because technically what you have here is a cartridge with this red Switch 2 cartridge that would still work in any of the cases, I assume, that the current Switch cartridges work in. So if you have something that you open up, put a bunch of them in there, close it, I guess the Switch 2 carts would also fit. So I think that is the best case scenario as to how they approached it. Will some people still try to jam the Switch 2 cartridge in a Switch 1? Absolutely, it's a mainstream device, but I feel like you're going to be stopped not even maybe a quarter of the way down as you try to press it, so hopefully that's enough to deter people from trying to apply a ton of force and basically jam it into their Switch 1 system. But still, interesting just to kind of get a look at this, and kind of surprising that the Welcome Tour even went that far into it, although maybe they think it'll help deter people from trying to force this cartridge into a Switch 1. Now, the other part here has to do with Shuhei Yoshida. And he was discussing the Switch 2 and some of his thoughts around the presentation from Nintendo, and he kind of sounded maybe a little disappointed with what Nintendo showed. And on one aspect, on one hand, I can actually see kind of the viewpoint here, as this has been going around for a little while based on some other people's reactions, but he says, to me, it was a bit of a mixed message from Nintendo. In a sense, I think Nintendo is losing their identity, in my opinion. For me, they are always about creating some new experience, like designing hardware and games together to create an amazing new experience. But Switch 2, as we all anticipated, is a better Switch, right? It's the larger screen, more powerful processor, higher resolution, 4K, 120 FPS. They even had a hardware person starting the stream, like other platforms do, right? And because it's a better Switch, the core premise of the whole Switch 2 is we made things better. and that's something other companies have been doing all the time. Shuhei Yoshida added that while the idea of a Switch with more powerful is undeniably a good thing because it enables certain third-party series to arrive on Nintendo hardware for the first time, he feels this is less of an enticing prospect for buyers who have multiple consoles and have already played those games. So this was actually on an interview here with Easy Allies, and this was transcribed by VGC. So I'll just link this article down below, as they also link out to Easy Allies to make it a bit easy there. But the idea that, it's a more powerful Switch. Okay, I was maybe thinking something a bit more would happen here from Nintendo. That's not a new reaction or thought process that I've seen that online a lot. It's a more powerful Switch. And that's technically not wrong, especially if you go back and look at how many ideas we were all coming up with as to what's the wrinkle here for Nintendo. There's got to be something we're missing. I mean, it turns out they did have a mouse mode, which I think that is a big deal for one major reason. While you do have systems now that enable a mouse to be plugged in, even like a keyboard, and you can use that just outright, it's not something that comes out of the box. It's not something that's integrated into the system, especially not the controller. In this case, though, with the Switch 2, it's something that developers who come onto the platform to either port their game or create from scratch can rely on. It's there. I mean, if you bought a Switch 2, it came with Joy-Cons, and guess what? Both of those can act as a mouse. So technically, you can have a mouse for your left hand, a mouse for your right hand, and you can do things as they show with like drag, X drive, or whatever. That just tells me that there could be more innovation with that in mind, as opposed to maybe it's just, it's all first-person shooters that can adapt over a bit better, or RTS games. It's still nice that it's there, but you can kind of see some of the innovation when it comes to that, and that being very Nintendo-like. However, what I sort of view here with Nintendo, and it's something that's kind of held firm for a while, is Nintendo typically will find technology that's not necessarily new, but that they can apply to games and repackage and then sell kind of as if it's new, because they do target the larger mainstream audience. All right. So the Wii, as an example, the idea of motion controls wasn't new, but the way that they implemented it with that platform, and then also made Wii Sports, as we've discussed before, as a pack-in title, did sort of introduce that concept for the first time to many people out there. So when I look at this as, it's not necessarily innovative, quote unquote, they're losing their identity, I then think about this handheld setup that they have with the screen, and then realize, while I have experienced VRR, HDR, 120 FPS all at once, even like on monitors or on the TV or something, there are many people out there who just have not. And this is something that, once again, is just there, present, out of the box, which means there are many people who are going to buy it and see all this stuff in front of them for the first time. And I will tell you, VRR, 120 FPS, it's something you can tell people over and over again is this awesome, game-changing experience even, but they have to have it in front of them to realize it. It's kind of similar, actually, in a way to VR. So VR has some of the craziest, most unique experiences with certain titles, but it's hard to tell somebody to go out and buy a VR headset on a whim for $500 or $600, something crazy. I mean, I know the Quest 3, it's like, what was that, $400? It went up in price, but you get what I'm saying. It's a big risk, whereas with something like this, you're already buying the Switch 2, say, for the Nintendo games, or maybe even just the core concept of a hybrid system that allows you to play something like Cyberpunk on the go. But then you play it and you're like, whoa, this screen is interesting. I've never seen something like this, especially if you do get, say, Metroid Prime 4, which is shaping up to take advantage of that sort of display. And it could actually like change your world when it comes to how you see games in general and how you experience them. You might then opt for your next big TV to be VRR enabled. You might start looking around and be like, what works with what's G-Sync? Okay, let me look into that. Okay, maybe that will be my next display. It's something that Nintendo is about to show what could potentially be 100 million people, depending on how this system sells, at least tens of millions, we'll say on the low end, all of this for the first time. And that's sort of how I look to Nintendo. Taking technology that exists, introducing it to a large number of more, we'll say casual but mainstream audience, and then sort of going from there. So the 3DS introduced stereoscopic 3D, glasses-free 3D for the first time to a ton of people. It was a really cool thing to see for the first time because like I hadn't even really seen it used much at all outside of that, and there it was with some unique experiences. I will say, though, we got to the point where we just started turning that off completely, and then eventually Nintendo just took it out of the system. But, like, Super Mario 3D Land came out, and that used it really, really well. So it was something that was genuinely unique. And when I look at this, while it is a better Switch, it's also what a lot of us asked for because we never got that Switch Pro. If we had the Switch Pro, now ironically looking at it, this would actually be kind of an underwhelming presentation and step up. So in a way, it is better we didn't get the Switch Pro because now the Switch 2 looks like a significant leap. But I think everything here that I'm seeing, I don't necessarily think that Nintendo is losing their quote-unquote identity. I will say, though, it's a different Nintendo right now. I think Shuhei Yoshida is correct in pointing out that, wow, they really went into a lot of the technical details. They absolutely did. They spent quite a bit of time, actually, showcasing, the 120 frames, VRR, and other aspects to it. And while they haven't really gone into, say, specifications behind the scenes around the chipset itself from NVIDIA, they did more than I was expecting in that presentation to really try to sell you on the technology aspect first. But they still showed how things like mouse mode could be used in many different titles, and I think that's something to watch throughout the generation outside of just your RTS, your first-person shooters. Things like Drag X Drive does make me think around other ideas or ways to play that could be implemented here with these different games. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Are you someone who looks at this and says, okay, Nintendo is kind of losing their identity from what we remember Nintendo to be 10, 15, 20 years ago? Or is this more standard fare as them going from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, the NES to the Super Nintendo, sort of that iterative release that they've done multiple times in the past? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.